Hello! I would be very pleased if you would like the video. Subscribe so you don't miss new videos every day that will help you relax. I'm also curious where you are listening to me from and what time it is now. Write it in the comments. Enjoy watching. The first rays of the sun stretched across the Nile, painting the horizon in gold and crimson. The vast city of Thebes slowly stirred, but within the walls of the royal palace, a different rhythm pulsed, one dictated not by the river or the marketplace, but by divine decree. Here, within the cool stone corridors adorned with intricate hieroglyphs, the pharaoh began his day. Pharaoh Amenemhat, a young yet already formidable ruler, opened his eyes to the faint scent of lotus and incense. His attendants were already at work, their soft footsteps echoing in the marble hall. White linen draped elegantly around his shoulders, and golden bracelets glinted on his wrists. He rose slowly, feeling the weight of his lineage and the sacred duties that accompanied it. In the silence before dawn fully claimed the city, he knelt before a small altar in his private chamber, offering prayers to Ra, the sun god, whose return each morning was a symbol of life and eternity. The priest Neferhotep entered quietly, carrying a censer of burning incense. Smoke curled in gentle spirals, filling the room with the fragrant scent of myrrh and frankincense. He bowed deeply. "O Pharaoh, blessed of the gods, may this day bring favor and prosperity." Amenemhat inclined his head. "Neferhotep, let the rituals begin. The gods must be pleased before the sun touches the land." The priest sprinkled holy water over the pharaoh's hands and face, chanting invocations to Amun-Ra, Osiris, and Hathor. The words were ancient, carrying the weight of centuries. As Amenemhat immersed himself in the ritual, he felt a sense of connection not just to the gods, but to the generations of pharaohs before him, all sworn to protect and nurture Egypt. Once the morning rites were complete, the pharaoh's attendants assisted him in dressing for the day. His ceremonial kilt, woven from the finest linen and embroidered with golden threads, shimmered in the growing sunlight. A broad collar of precious stones lay upon his chest, each jewel representing the wealth and power of his reign. Upon his brow rested the royal diadem, signifying his divine right to rule. Outside his chamber, the palace began to hum with activity. Courtiers, scribes, and servants moved through vast halls lined with painted murals depicting battles, festivals, and offerings to the gods. Breakfast was a simple affair, though no less significant. Fresh bread, honey, figs, and dates were served alongside goose eggs and fish from the Nile. Pharaoh Amenemhat ate slowly, mindful of the balance between indulgence and ritual purity. Today, he would oversee the construction of the Great Pyramid, meet with his council, and attend the first of many religious ceremonies. Every action, however mundane it seemed, was entwined with the divine. Every decision carried the weight of eternity. As the sun climbed higher, the pharaoh walked through the palace gardens, where lotus blooms floated serenely in pools, and birdsong filled the air. The scent of papyrus and flowering acacia trees mingled with the faint aroma of baked bread from the kitchens. Children of the nobility played under the watchful eyes of their tutors, while artisans polished statues and carved intricate reliefs depicting the pharaoh's triumphs. Amenemhat paused at a marble fountain, watching the water sparkle. In the reflection, he saw not just his face, but the future of Egypt, a kingdom stretching from the deserts of Nubia to the fertile delta of the Nile. The first audience of the day awaited him in the Hall of Columns, a grand space where the ceilings soared like the heavens themselves, painted with stars and constellations. Viziers, generals, and high priests gathered, their robes rustling softly. Among them was Senmut, the chief architect, who had devoted his life to building monuments worthy of the pharaoh's name. Beside him stood Ahmose, the master of the royal treasury, whose keen mind ensured the kingdom's wealth flowed smoothly, and Hatshepsut, a priestess whose visions were sought by even the most powerful rulers. Amenemhat entered the hall with measured steps. The murmurs of courtiers fell silent, and all eyes turned to him. "Welcome, loyal servants of Egypt," he said, his voice steady, carrying authority without force. "Today, we honor the gods and the legacy of our ancestors. Speak, and let wisdom guide your words." The viziers reported on matters of state. The granaries were full, but there were rumors of unrest in Upper Egypt. The priests spoke of omens seen in the stars and the flight of sacred birds. The master builder detailed progress on the pyramid, describing how massive stones were quarried, transported, and carefully placed. Each report was met with careful consideration. Amenemhat asked questions, his mind moving swiftly from strategy to ceremony, always aware that the divine and the mortal were intertwined in the governance of his kingdom. By mid-morning, the pharaoh donned a simpler linen tunic and sandals, ready for inspection of the pyramid construction. The journey to the site was an event in itself. Chariots rolled along the sandy roads, accompanied by musicians and attendants carrying offerings. The workers, men, women, and even children, paused as the royal procession passed, bowing deeply. Among the laborers, a sense of pride mingled with exhaustion. They were building not just a tomb, but a symbol of eternity, a bridge between the earthly realm and the divine. At the construction site, the scale of the endeavor became evident. Massive stones, quarried from distant hills, lay in orderly piles, ready to be hoisted into place. Ramps of packed earth stretched skyward, and teams of workers hauled stones with ropes and wooden sleds. Pharaoh Amenemhat walked among them, observing closely, listening to the foreman describe their methods. He asked about the safety of the workers, the quality of the stones, and the precision of measurements. His presence inspired both awe and diligence. Even the sun seemed to shine more brightly upon the stones in honor of the pharaoh. As the sun reached its zenith, the pharaoh paused, raising his hands in a silent prayer. He invoked Ptah, god of craftsmen, asking for skill, patience, and strength to guide the laborers. Around him, the clatter of chisels and the shouts of overseers resumed, as though acknowledging the blessing. Amenemhat spoke to the workers directly, offering encouragement, sharing wisdom, and reminding them that their labor would endure beyond time, securing the favor of the gods and the memory of Egypt's greatness. Returning to the palace in the late afternoon, the pharaoh performed additional rituals, offering food and drink to statues of the gods. Priests chanted, incense filled the air, and the air seemed charged with a sacred energy. Pharaoh Amenemhat listened to reports from astrologers and advisors, seeking insight into the future. Omens of prosperity were interpreted alongside warnings of challenges to come. Each sign, each whisper from the divine, guided his decisions. As evening fell, the palace came alive with anticipation for the royal banquet. The great hall was illuminated with oil lamps and torches, casting flickering light on walls adorned with depictions of gods, kings, and heroic feats. Musicians played lyres and flutes, while dancers moved gracefully, telling stories of creation and conquest. Tables were laden with roasted meats, freshly baked bread, dates, figs, honey, and wine. Pharaoh Amenemhat reclined on a golden couch, surrounded by nobles and emissaries from foreign lands. The air was thick with the scent of spices and the sound of laughter. Conversation at the banquet was lively yet respectful. Diplomatic matters were discussed subtly, while nobles shared tales of adventure and cleverness. Pharaoh Amenemhat listened intently, occasionally speaking to guide discussions or subtly steer decisions in favor of the kingdom. Amid the revelry, there was always an undercurrent of observation. He was both ruler and guardian, ensuring loyalty, justice, and the favor of the gods remained intact. As the banquet concluded, the pharaoh retired to his private chambers. He walked along the terrace, gazing at the Nile shimmering under the moonlight, reflecting on the day's events. The rituals, councils, and inspections had passed, yet the weight of leadership was ever present. He contemplated the legacy he would leave, the monuments that would outlast generations, and the divine duty that connected him to Egypt's past and future. Here, in the quiet of the night, Pharaoh Amenemhat allowed himself a moment of reflection, understanding that even as a mortal, his actions were woven into the eternal tapestry of the gods. Night rituals followed, simple yet profound. He offered prayers before retiring to rest, seeking guidance from the stars, asking for wisdom, strength, and clarity. The palace grew silent, but for the distant sounds of the Nile and the gentle rustle of reeds in the night breeze. Pharaoh Amenemhat finally closed his eyes, the weight of a kingdom resting lightly upon him, confident that he had fulfilled his sacred duties, ready to face the challenges of the next day. The dawn of the second day arrived with the soft glow of sunlight spilling over the horizon. Pharaoh Amenemhat's chamber was already alive with movement. Unlike the previous day, This morning was dedicated entirely to the sacred duties of the ruler, duties that connected him to the gods and reminded all of the divine mandate of kingship. The palace corridors echoed with the faint footsteps of priests preparing for the rituals to come, and the scent of freshly burned incense filled the air, a tangible sign that the gods were being summoned into the mortal realm. Amenemhat rose promptly, his movements deliberate and precise. Each action, from washing his hands in cold water drawn from the Nile to arranging his hair and donning his ceremonial kilt, was laden with symbolic meaning. Amenemhat rose promptly, his movements deliberate and precise. Each action, from washing his hands in cold water drawn from the Nile to arranging his hair and donning his ceremonial kilt, was laden with symbolic meaning. The priests, led by Neferhotep, performed a purification ritual, chanting softly. The pharaoh placed his hands over his heart, bowing his head to the floor in a gesture that acknowledged his place between mortals and immortals. He was the living embodiment of Horus on earth, the protector of Ma, the cosmic order that maintained balance in Egypt. Once the pharaoh's body was purified, the next ritual involved offerings to the gods. Small tables were arranged in a semicircle around the chamber, laden with bread, figs, dates, honey, and water from the Nile. Each offering was accompanied by an invocation, a chant that ensured the gods would receive not only sustenance but the devotion of their chosen king. Amenemhat touched each item reverently, whispering a prayer for prosperity, health, and protection. The incense smoke twisted and curled toward the ceiling, as if carrying his words straight to the divine. After the personal rituals, the pharaoh prepared to enter the temple for the morning ceremonies, accompanied by a retinue of priests and attendants. The temple doors opened onto a courtyard where sunlight illuminated hieroglyphs depicting the creation of the world and the divine lineage of pharaohs. Columns carved with sacred symbols reached skyward, and the walls were covered with painted reliefs depicting gods and goddesses engaged in acts of creation, war, and protection. The air was heavy with incense, and the sound of sacred music, a combination of lyres, flutes, and rhythmic clapping, resonated through the halls, creating a sense of otherworldly presence. Within the temple, Amenemhat approached the central altar, flanked by statues of Amun-Ra and Osiris. The high priest, adorned in elaborate robes, led the ceremonial chants. The pharaoh listened intently, his mind absorbing each word, understanding that these ceremonies were more than tradition. They were a form of divine communication. The priests explained the omens seen in the sky, interpreting the movements of the stars and the flight of sacred birds. These omens were considered messages from the gods, and the pharaoh weighed each interpretation with care, knowing that one misstep could bring disaster upon the land. The rituals were elaborate. Priests waved fans and burned incense, while acolytes carried vessels of water, milk, and wine to be poured over sacred statues. Pharaoh Amenemhat performed the libations himself, a delicate act demonstrating both humility and authority. He poured water over a statue of Osiris, symbolizing the flow of life and death, and presented bread and honey to Hathor, invoking joy and fertility upon the land. Each act was a reminder that Pharaoh and gods were entwined, that the ruler's hands were guided by divine will, and that his duty was to ensure the prosperity of Egypt. After the ceremonial offerings, Amenemhat met with the council of priests in the temple's inner sanctum. This chamber, accessible only to those of highest rank, was lined with sacred texts and scrolls detailing rituals, prophecies, and records of past pharaohs. The priests discussed recent visions and omens. One spoke of a comet appearing in the western sky, an event considered both auspicious and potentially foreboding. Another reported that the Nile's waters had risen higher than expected, signaling fertility but also the need for careful management of farmland. Amenemhat listened attentively, asking questions, seeking clarity, and consulting with Neferhotep about the proper rituals to appease the gods in response. Even as the council discussed sacred matters, the pharaoh's mind was never far from worldly concerns. He asked about the workers building the Great Pyramid, inquiring whether any shortages or injuries had occurred. The priests assured him that the gods favored the construction and that laborers were motivated by divine blessing. Yet Amenemhat's sharp mind could not ignore the practicalities. The coordination of thousands of workers, the transport of massive stone blocks, and the management of resources. His leadership required both devotion to the gods and practical wisdom to maintain harmony in the kingdom. By mid-morning, the pharaoh emerged from the temple into the bright light of day. Outside, the city of Thebes thrummed with life. Markets overflowed with goods from across the Nile Valley, grains, spices, textiles, and pottery. And the people looked upon the pharaoh with reverence. He walked among them, not as a distant deity, but as a living symbol of Ma. Citizens bowed, merchants paused, and children whispered his name with awe. Amenemhat raised his hand in acknowledgement, a gesture that reminded them that divine favor was not distant but present in their ruler's gaze. As he returned to the palace, the pharaoh prepared for a brief period of meditation and reflection, a practice he observed daily. In his private chamber, he reviewed reports, scribes presenting detailed scrolls on agricultural yields, military readiness, and trade expeditions. Pharaoh Amenemhat considered each detail with care, recognizing that even the most mundane tasks were under the purview of the divine. Every grain harvested, every brick laid in the pyramid, every coin spent or saved contributed to the balance of the cosmos, maintained through his careful stewardship. Soon after, the pharaoh met with a select group of astrologers. Their role was critical, as celestial events were interpreted as messages from the gods. They presented charts depicting the positions of the stars and planets, pointing out alignments that signaled both opportunity and caution. Amenemhat asked questions, carefully comparing their interpretations with the visions reported by the priests. The pharaoh understood that knowledge of the heavens was not mere superstition but a science intertwined with religion, guiding decisions about construction, harvest, and warfare. The morning concluded with a second ritual, one intended to bless the Nile and ensure the prosperity of the land. Pharaoh Amenemhat, accompanied by priests and temple attendants, traveled to the riverbank. He performed a libation, offering milk, honey, and grains to the waters. The priests chanted, invoking the river's spirits to carry fertility to the fields and nourishment to the people. The ceremony was not only symbolic, it reminded all present that the pharaoh's rule was inseparable from the natural world, that the kingdom's health depended upon divine harmony and human diligence alike. Returning to the palace after these morning ceremonies, Amenemhat prepared for the afternoon council, where administrative matters would take precedence. Yet even as he dressed for this meeting, his mind carried the spiritual weight of the rituals he had performed. Each ceremony was a thread in a complex tapestry, linking his mortal actions to the eternal will of the gods. To neglect any part of this sacred duty would be to disturb the balance, and Pharaoh Amenemhat never allowed such oversight. The people of Thebes continued their daily routines, aware that the pharaoh's attention to both ritual and governance ensured their prosperity. Farmers tended fields nourished by the blessed Nile. Artisans continued their work on temples and statues, and merchants exchanged goods brought from distant lands. The pharaoh's influence was omnipresent, yet exercised with care, visible in rituals, subtle in guidance, and ever conscious of the fragile balance between heaven and earth. By late morning, the first half of the day had concluded. Pharaoh Amenemhat moved seamlessly from the spiritual to the practical, embodying the role of divine king, guardian of Ma, and pragmatic ruler. The morning ceremonies were complete, yet their effects rippled outward, toward the city, the temples, the river, and the workers building the pyramid. Each act of devotion strengthened both the pharaoh and the kingdom, ensuring that Egypt would continue to thrive under his watchful eye. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of the palace council chamber, catching the gold inlaid into the hieroglyphs on the walls. The pharaoh's throne stood at the far end, elevated slightly, not out of arrogance but as a symbol of his divine mandate. Around him, the viziers, scribes, and generals gathered in quiet reverence. Amenemhat entered, wearing a white linen robe trimmed in deep blue. The hall fell silent. He raised his hand, and the sound of rustling papyrus ceased. "Let us begin," he said calmly. "Speak to me of Egypt, of her strength, her people, and her future." The first to step forward was Vizier Intef, a man of great wisdom and calm. "Mighty Pharaoh," he began, "the harvest has been plentiful this season. The Nile's flood was kind, and our granaries overflow. Yet the roads along the eastern trade routes require repair. Caravans from Nubia report delays." Amenemhat nodded slowly. "Send workers and guards," he ordered. "The gods bless trade, but only through diligence do we honor them." His words carried a balance of divinity and practicality, both priest and ruler in one body. Next came General Kai, a tall man with bronze skin and eyes sharp as a hawk's. Your Majesty, the southern borders remain peaceful, but scouts have sighted movement beyond the desert. Nomadic tribes, nothing organized, yet we stay alert. The pharaoh leaned forward slightly. Keep watch, he said. A storm begins with a single grain of sand. I trust your vigilance. Kai bowed deeply, his armor gleaming like the river under sunlight. Then came the architects, Senmut among them, his face lined from years under the desert sun. O Pharaoh, he said, spreading scrolls before the throne, the pyramid rises as commanded. We near the 30th layer of stone, yet transportation of the upper blocks grows slow. The sleds strain, and the workers grow weary. Amenemhat studied the drawings carefully. You have done well, Senmut. Rest your men at sunset. Fatigue breeds error, and this monument must stand for eternity. His tone was firm but not harsh. The architect bowed, gratitude shining in his weary eyes. After the council concluded, the pharaoh rose. I will see the work myself, he declared. The chamber stirred. None had expected the divine ruler to travel under the noon sun. But Amenemhat believed that a king's presence inspired more than 1,000 commands. By midday, the royal procession wound its way through the dusty road leading to the plateau. Soldiers marched in formation, banners fluttering like the wings of falcons. Villagers gathered along the path, bowing as the pharaoh's chariot passed. To them, he was not just a man, he was the living bridge between earth and sky. The pyramid loomed in the distance, its white limestone catching the sun, blinding and glorious. As the pharaoh approached, the noise of hammers, chisels, and shouted orders filled the air. Thousands of workers toiled in harmony, each move deliberate, each effort a prayer in motion. Amenemhat dismounted, walking slowly across the sand. The overseers and foremen dropped to one knee, bowing low. Rise, he said gently. Let us see the work of Egypt's hands. He climbed the first ramp, examining the blocks with a practiced eye. Senmut joined him, pointing out new innovations. Rollers carved from cedar, ropes woven tighter than before. Your Majesty, he said, we have devised a method to lift the heavier stones more smoothly. The gods favor our efforts. The pharaoh smiled faintly. The gods favor those who honor craft with devotion. You have their blessing, and mine. Around them, the workers' chants grew louder, rhythmic and unified, as if the entire site breathed with a single soul. At the upper level, the pharaoh paused. From this height, he could see the Nile twisting through the green valley, life against endless desert. He turned to Senmut. When this pyramid is complete, he said softly, its shadow shall stretch to eternity. Not for my glory, but for Egypt's. The architect bowed deeply. Your Majesty's vision guides us beyond stone and time. The pharaoh nodded but said nothing more. The wind carried his silence like a sacred vow. As he descended, Amenemhat noticed a worker collapsed near a block of stone. The overseer moved to drag him away, but the pharaoh raised his hand. Bring him shade, he commanded. Give him water. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the divine ruler knelt beside the man. He carries Egypt upon his shoulders, the pharaoh murmured. His sweat is sacred. The overseers hurried to obey. Word of the pharaoh's compassion spread like fire through the workers. Where fatigue had weighed them down, pride now lifted their spirits. To them, he was not a distant god, but a living guardian. After inspecting the storage pits and quarry roads, Amenemhat gathered the foremen. Tell your men, he said, that every stone they raise is a prayer made eternal. Let no hand falter, for through your work, the gods see Egypt's heart. The workers cheered, their voices echoing across the sands. By late afternoon, the sun began its slow descent. The pharaoh's chariot turned back toward the city, leaving behind the rhythmic heartbeat of the pyramid's construction. Dust rose behind the wheels, glowing like gold in the dying light. Back in the palace, Amenemhat washed his hands in perfumed water, the ritual cleansing away the touch of stone and sand. Neferhotep awaited him, ready to perform the evening purification. The gods smile upon your labor, my king, the priest said softly. The gods smile upon all who build in faith, Amenemhat replied. He gazed through the window, where the horizon still shimmered with heat. But faith must live in action. That is how eternity remembers. Neferhotep bowed, understanding the deeper meaning behind the pharaoh's words. As the evening drums sounded across Thebes, the ruler of Egypt stood in silent reflection. The day's work was done, yet his vision stretched beyond the walls, beyond time itself. For him, leadership was not the weight of a crown, but the act of creation, of shaping chaos into order, sand into stone, and dreams into monuments that even the gods would gaze upon with envy. And as the final light faded, the pharaoh whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for the thousands who built his legacy with hands of clay and hearts of fire. Evening descended upon Thebes like a golden veil. The air cooled, and torches flickered along the palace walls, casting long shadows that danced over painted hieroglyphs. Within, servants hurried through corridors, carrying trays of fruit, wine, and roasted meats. The great hall of celebration was being prepared for the royal banquet. Musicians tuned their lyres while dancers stretched gracefully in the courtyard. The scent of myrrh and cinnamon drifted through the air, blending with the faint hum of anticipation. Tonight was more than a feast, it was a ritual of thanksgiving, a tribute to the gods and the strength of Egypt under Pharaoh Amenemhat's rule. The pharaoh entered the hall slowly, his presence commanding silence. He wore a golden collar that shimmered in the lamplight and a crown adorned with lapis lazuli and turquoise. Behind him came his high priests, generals, and closest advisors. Courtiers bowed deeply as he took his place upon the elevated throne. "Let the banquet begin," Amenemhat declared. The musicians struck the first chords, a melody that spoke of triumph and eternity. Servants poured wine into silver cups as laughter and conversation filled the vast chamber. Yet, beneath the joy, an air of reverence lingered. Every word spoken before the pharaoh was weighed carefully. At the long tables, nobles from every corner of the kingdom sat together. Governors from the Delta, generals from Nubia, priests from Memphis. They brought gifts, rare gems, spices, and carvings, to honor the pharaoh. Each offering was received with measured grace, for generosity was a language of loyalty. Amenemhat listened as Vizier Intif spoke of prosperity, praising the balance between temple and throne. "Egypt thrives because Ma thrives," he said. The pharaoh nodded. "Yes," he replied. "Order is not the absence of chaos, it is its mastery." His words drew quiet admiration from all who heard them. The dancers began their performance, their movements telling stories of creation and kingship. Bare feet brushed the floor in rhythmic grace, gold bracelets clinking softly. The pharaoh watched, not with idle pleasure, but as one who saw meaning in every motion. Each step mirrored the cycles of life, death, and rebirth that defined Egypt's faith. Between the dances, Amenemhat spoke with foreign envoys, men from distant lands beyond the desert. They brought news of trade routes, alliances, and dangers. "The world watches Egypt," one envoy said respectfully. "Your kingdom is a beacon of power." Amenemhat smiled faintly, then let the light never dim. Wine flowed freely, laughter rose like music. The pharaoh remained composed, his expression serene, his mind ever aware. He knew that power was both gift and test. Around him, nobles toasted his name, but he also sensed whispers, the subtle movements of ambition, the eternal shadow of politics that no crown could dispel. Hatshepsut, the priestess, approached with a silver bowl filled with lotus petals. "O Pharaoh, blessed by the gods," she said, "may these petals guard your dreams." She scattered them before his throne, the fragrance rising sweet and pure. "The gods favor you," she whispered, "but even they envy your legacy." Later in the night, the music slowed. A hush fell as the high priest Neferhotep rose to speak. "All Egypt rejoices, for the great pyramid rises toward the heavens. It is the bridge between worlds, your eternal throne." The hall erupted in applause. Amenemhat stood, raising his cup. "My people," he said, voice strong but calm, "our hands shape eternity. The stones we lift today will speak when our voices are dust. Let us build not only monuments of stone, but of justice, of unity, of Ma." His words carried through the hall like wind through reeds, soft yet unyielding. The feast continued long into the night. Musicians played faster, dancers spun, and laughter mingled with the scent of sweet wine. Yet, when the stars rose high above Thebes, the pharaoh quietly excused himself. Duty never ended, even when the music played loudest. He walked alone through the palace gardens. Moonlight silvered the pools where lotus flowers floated. The air was cool and still, broken only by the gentle chirping of crickets. Here, away from the noise of celebration, Pharaoh Amenemhat could think. He paused by a statue of Ra, carved in smooth alabaster. "O great sun," he whispered, "you rise eternal. Yet I rise only once. May my reign honor the light you give." He bowed his head, feeling the humility that only true power understands. A servant approached quietly, carrying a torch. "My king," he said softly, "the stars shine brightly tonight." Amenemhat looked upward. The constellations glimmered like jewels scattered across the velvet sky. "They shine," he murmured, "because the gods remind us how small we are, and yet how infinite our deeds can become." He thought of the pyramid, still incomplete but already monumental. He imagined the workers toiling even now by torchlight, their songs rising with the dust. He thought of his ancestors, their names preserved in stone, their spirits whispering through eternity. And he wondered how his own name would echo through time. Returning to his private chamber, the pharaoh dismissed his attendants. Alone, he removed his crown and set it upon a marble table. For a moment, he simply looked at it, the weight of power lying silent, gleaming in the flicker of lamplight. He exhaled slowly, feeling both pride and weariness. He walked to the balcony. Below him, the city of Thebes shimmered, alive even in the late hours. The Nile reflected the moon, an endless ribbon of silver. All of this, he thought, exists between two breaths of the gods, creation and eternity. A faint breeze brushed against his face. He felt the divine presence around him, not as thunder or fire, but as calm understanding. The gods did not need words. They spoke in silence, in stars, in the slow heartbeat of the Nile. The pharaoh returned inside, where Neferhotep awaited with the final ritual of the night. The priest lit a small flame and placed it before a miniature statue of Osiris. "For renewal," he said quietly, "that you may awaken with strength." Amenemhat touched the flame's edge with his fingers, feeling its warmth. "And for Egypt," he replied, "that she may never fade." When the ceremony ended, he lay upon his bed of fine linen, the soft fragrance of lotus surrounding him. His thoughts drifted like sand in the wind, toward the workers, the priests, the river, and the gods. He dreamed of the pyramid complete, its white surface gleaming beneath an eternal sun. He saw his people prospering, his name inscribed upon the hearts of generations unborn. And in that dream, he felt not pride, but peace. As dawn's first light crept through the curtains, Pharaoh Amenemhat opened his eyes once more. A new day awaited, new rituals, new councils, new labors beneath the gods. He rose, serene and resolute, ready to carry Egypt's destiny forward. For a pharaoh's reign was never measured in years, but in the eternity his deeds carved into stone.